Good morning. I hope everyone is having a good day. We're going to start Henry IV, Part 1. As I told you guys in class, we're only doing Henry IV, Part 1. I'm not that cruel. And we're just going to kind of continue the same rubric I've worked on throughout the semester: character, conflict, connection, and theme. Ever so often, I will use the fancy teacher word, access prior learning, but most of that falls under the connection part. Quick reminder about what's coming up. We're finishing out with Henry IV. May 7th, Quinn will present and we'll have the quiz. The final paper is due at 11:59 p.m. or 11:59 p.m. on May 8th. And then April 30th at 11:59 p.m., the comedies paper is due. I have started out, I think, most of the place talking about either here are some of the themes that we're going to be looking at or questions the play poses. Some of these we have looked at before. The question of what makes a good ruler carries with it the question of who should rule. What kind of, the person who is ruling, does this person have the qualities necessary to rule? We've also, I think, what does it mean to act like an adult? We hinted at that with Mark Antony in Julius Caesar. He was too party like, and yet he was able to turn the tables on people. We're dealing here to some degree with family. We have father and son. And because we're dealing with kings and we're dealing with honor, or because we're dealing with kings and we're dealing with war, we are dealing with the question of honor. And what is it? Should it be valued? If it should be valued, how much should it be valued? We have dealt with this last question on this slide before. What are the appearances the person puts out to the world? And how do we reconcile the differences between those appearances and how a person actually is? We talked about the imposter syndrome, perhaps with Angelo. We've talked about appearances and reality with other characters. False face must hide what false heart doth know, with Macbeth, for example. And so the play is continuing to deal with those questions. And again, you've heard me rant about this a lot. I think Shakespeare is as good as Freud. How can one mature? I haven't talked about this enough. Some of Shakespeare's other plays have done this, but what is the power of words? And then finally, I think in this play, we've had wars before. Julius Caesar, for example, dealt with wars. We had a war to some degree in Othello, although that one was truncated by the storm and things like that. We've had, Macbeth had the war for the kingdom sort of thing. But what's it good for? I think that this question comes into play here, and certainly Falstaff will give us some negative insight into that, perhaps. The one thing I do want to add here is the lit term du jour. I've talked about dichotomies, but this is not necessarily a dichotomy. When we talk about foil, we are talking about a character that has characteristics that oppose another character. So, in other words, an extremely tall character will set off the idea that this other character is short. Or we will have a very, very blonde character to set off somebody who is, darker hair or whatever all else. It can be physical, it can be emotional. We'll have somebody dark and brooding, and then we'll have somebody who is less dark and brooding. We can have the ethereal or intellectual as opposed to the physical and brute force sort of thing. They're opposite the protagonist. Or they can be very, very similar with one key difference. But these people are not necessarily the antagonist. They can be the person side by side with the protagonist. They can be the protagonist's love interest. They can be the protagonist's best friend. Whatever it is that they do, however, they are going to set off the antagonist. They're going to illustrate some key element of the protagonist. Excuse me. They're going to illustrate some key element of the protagonist. I've talked about this several times, but I think it's important to remember the name Hotspur certainly gives us this idea that he is fiery, he is ready to put the spur to the horses. Everything is going to be a whirl of motion, and violence can, be right around there. Falstaff. It does strike me that there's a false in here. Um, that the name itself implies that he's kind of a bit of a liar. And I probably should have done that a little bit more with some of the other names. Certainly, we should have talked about Kate Keeptown, the idea that she keeps company with the whole town, those sorts of things in previous plays. But I think for this play, it's important to remember that the names give us hints into the character. And I think we are going to start with this idea of war as a force that gives us meaning. There was a title of a book about that, and I'm not trying to be sardonic or be overly political here. But notice the Civil War is over. So shaken as we are, so wane with care, no more the thirsty entrance of the soil shall daub her lips with her own children's blood, nor more shall trenching war channel her fields. There's some more about the Civil War is over, or at least the war inside the kingdom is over. Therefore, friends, as far as to the sepulchre of Christ, whose soldier now, under whose blessed cross we are impressed and engaged to fight, forthwith a power of English shall we levy, whose arms were molded in their mother's womb to chase these pagans in these holy fields. So now that we're done fighting each other, we automatically are going to start looking to fight someplace else. Where we had an us and a them within the kingdom, we are now creating an us, the good Christian soldiers, against the pagans, and it's going to be a holy war, and we're just going to go fight. We've finished one, let's go fight the other. And the idea of fighting and warfare is going to be, I think, a big part of this play as we go. And then we start out with Henry IV. And it goes with, yea, there thou makest me sad and makest me sin, in envy that my lord Northumberland should be the father to so blessed a son who is the theme of honor's tongue, amongst a grove the very straightest plant, who is sweet fortune's minion and her pride, whilst I, by looking on the praise of him, see riot and dishonor stain the brow of my young Harry. Oh, that it could be proved that some night-tripping fairy had exchanged in cradle clothes our children where they lay, and called mine Percy his Plantagenet, then would I have his Harry, and he mine. I want to switch sons. I love Hotspur. I don't like Prince Hal. He parties too much. And so you have sort of this idea that we're going to contrast Hotspur with Harry. Now, if you read some of the background stuff, Shakespeare is playing fast and loose with the history here. Hotspur in real life. Remember, this is a history play, so it's based on real life. In history, he would have been a lot older than Prince Hal. But by making them close to the same age, we set up this conflict, and we get Henry IV to muse about what he wants in a son, and he doesn't want what he has in Prince Hal. I think it's important to understand, though, that there are 3 Henrys, and understanding each one of them is key. So you have Henry the King, looking to be responsible, he is perhaps, I think we will see, a little bit Machiavellian. Prince Hal might have that same quality. In fact, at the conclusion of today's presentation, we can muse a bit about whether he is Machiavellian. And then we also have Hotspur, and Hotspur is, the opposite of that. He's all action. He is all violence. He doesn't do much talking. He's hot-headed. where the other ones are thinkiers and more manipulative, I think. There's some more slides, so this is not the end of everything. But based on your reading so far, who's your favorite Henry and why? Take a few minutes, finish it out, and remember, there's more slides. If you want to wait till the end before you go to your folder, that's fine. Just remember, this is the daily writing for today. And then when we talk about Hotspur, we are already setting up the idea that there's going to be conflict between Henry IV and Hotspur, and we're also setting up one of his flaws. What think you, cuz, of this young Percy's pride? The prisoners which he in this adventure hath surprised, to his own use he keeps, and sends me word I shall have none but Mordrake, Earl of Fife. Now remember that one of the things with prisoners was ransoming them, brought in a lot of money to the coffers, and so this would have been perhaps part of the problem that he's having here. But there's pride and there's conflict. And again, this ties back to deals that were made in Richard II or talked about in the play Richard II. But I don't think we need to know those in great detail to understand that this is not going to turn out well, that the king wants his cut. And if the king's not getting his cut, there's going to be problems. And we have the character set up as proud, direct characterization, and we have the character showing some kind of hot-headedness, as you will, living up again to the nickname. Speaking of direct characterization, Prince Hal is talking to Falstaff, but I do think it's pretty clear this is who he is. Thou art so fat-witted, with drinking of old sack and unbuttoning thee after supper and sleeping upon benches after noon, that thou hast forgotten to demand that truly which thou wouldst truly know. What a devil hast thou to do with the time of day? Unless hours were cups of sack, and minutes capons and clocks, the tongues of bawds and dials, the signs of leaping houses, and the blessed sun himself, a fair hot wench in flame-colored taffeta, I see no reason why thou should be so superfluous to demand the time of day. Let's start at the bottom. Superfluous. Unnecessary. All right? Unless hours were cups of sack, unless hours were glasses of wine, and minutes fat roosters, clocks the tongues of bawds, in other words, the prostitutes whispering sweet nothings in his ear to get him to part with his money, and dials the signs of leaping houses, in other words, the red lights of a house of prostitution, and the sun himself, a fair hot wench in flame-colored taffeta, in other words, the sun were some beautiful young prostitute in a fancy silk, dress, and hot could be the idea that we're going to wind up in hell for all of the sinning that we're doing here. He's telling us pretty much who Falstaff is. Falstaff is just a big fat old drunk who likes visiting houses of prostitution. Indirect characterization. One of the things I think we have to look at with Falstaff is he knows how to turn a line. And he knows how to make himself look good and to make his activities sound good. Marry then, sweet wag, when thou art king, let not us that are squires of the knight's body be called thieves of Dave's beauty. Let us be Diana's foresters, gentlemen of the shade, minions of the moon. And let men say that we men of good government, being governed, as the sea is, by our noble and chaste mistress the moon, under whose countenance we steal. All of these activities, prostitution, drunkenness, eating, gluttony, are governed by the chaste mistress the moon. Makes it sound really good. Gentlemen of the shade, not wild drunks. Minions of the moon, servants of the chaste mistress. They're not thieves of day's beauty. They are followers of the goddess of the moon. It sounds good. It sounds really good. And so I think just the idea of gentlemen of the shade and men of good government. Remember, we've talked about being able to govern yourselves, and now they are governed by the moon. And then finally, we have to take a look at Prince Hal. Remember that this speech, and we have 2 slides for it, he is talking to the audience, and the audience is getting an insight that the rest of the characters do not have. After hearing this speech, we know something about Prince Hal that none of the other characters do. I know you all, and will a while uphold the unyoked humor of your idleness. Yet herein will I imitate the sun, who doth permit the base contagious clouds to smother up his beauty from the world, that, when he please again to be himself, being wanted, he may be more wondered at by breaking through the foul and ugly mists of vapors that did seem to strangle him. So in other words, I'm going to party while I can. I am young. I don't have a lot of responsibilities. I'm going to hang around with you, sorry lot. There's going to be a time when I'm going to have to shine like the sun, when I'm going to have to be the king. And I'm going to burn through the clouds that you guys are around me. And he has this realization here. If all the year were playing holidays, to sport would be as tedious as to work. But when they seldom come, they're wished for come, and nothing pleaseth but rare accidents. In other words, if all we had to do to play, then playing would become work. I always joke that work is a 4-letter word, while play is a 4-letter word too. And so, if that's all we had, and so he's understanding that he's going to have to work at some point. And when he has to work, when he becomes king, what Falstaff wants isn't going to happen. So when this loose behavior I throw off and pay the debt I never promised, by how much better than my word I am, by so much shall I falsify men's hopes. In other words, all of you who hope in me, it's not going to work. And like bright metal on sullen ground, my reformation, glittering o'er my fault, shall show more goodly and attract more eyes than that which hath no foil to set it off. I'll so offend and make offense a skill, redeeming time when men think least I will. There's a Machiavellian thing here. It's almost a reverse Machiavellian thing. Machiavelli said, appear to be noble, appear to be good, and when you can't be bad. Here he's appearing to be a drunken lout, so that when he has to appear good, everybody will be impressed with how good he can be. There's a certain Machiavellian or reverse Machiavellian thing going on here. And then finally, quick allusions. Ephesians 5:16, redeeming the time because the days are evil. And Colossians 4:5, walk in wisdom toward them that are without, redeeming the time. I think these 2 verses, the days are evil, so we can talk about Hal's actions perhaps being over the top, but he's walking in wisdom towards them that were without, redeeming the time, partying perhaps, until he can't party anymore. I'm not sure he's doing the walking in wisdom as much as he should be, perhaps, but both of those verses, I think, use the phrase, and I think it's important to think about what do these scriptures mean? How do they apply to Prince Hal? How do they apply to what he's doing? I think that'll wrap it up for today. We'll pick up some more on Friday, and we'll just kind of keep going from there.